Thank you. When I was 8 years old, my father took me and my sister on a train journey from Johannesburg to Port Elizabeth. And on this train journey, he read us the story of Perseus and the slaying of the Gorgon Medusa from a children's book of stories of Greek myths. King Acrisius of Argos asked the oracle how long he would live. The oracle declined to give him a number, but told him that he would be killed by his own grandson. King Acrisius, terrified, had his own daughter Danae locked up in a dungeon in a room with neither door nor window. But Zeus, the king of the gods, saw her through a crack in the wall, and he entered the wall as a shower of gold, and there he seduced and impregnated Danae. Quite how my father described this part to a 9-year-old, I'm not quite certain. But Danae bears a son, Perseus, and King Acrisius, enraged, terrified, has Danae and the infant Perseus put into a wooden chest and thrown out to sea. But instead of sinking, the chest and its 2 inmates wash up on the shore of the island of Seriphos, where a shepherd, Dictys, finds it. The shepherd looks after Danae and her son, and over the years, Perseus grows into a strong, agile youth. Meanwhile, the king of Seriphos, Polydictes, has heard of the beauty of Danae and wants to take her as his concubine. But fearing the protective wrath of her son Perseus, he sends Perseus on a suicidal mission. Perseus is sent to kill the Gorgon Medusa. And this is the heart of the story of Perseus. The Gorgons, as we know, are a tribe of women too terrifying to behold. Their hair is made of living snakes, and to look at them is to be turned into stone. And now the page of the book that he was reading, which had the image of Medusa, had to be turned very quickly. It was to be glimpsed at, but not to be looked at. I mean, it fell into a category of pictures which were too powerful to be contemplated. I mean, you could add to the list images I remember. The red, enraged, terrifying head of Beethoven in Percy Scholes' Oxford Companion to Music. An image of the Loathly Lady in a children's book of stories of the Canterbury Tales. We could add to it the fire which is too bright for the prisoners in the cave to look at. We could add to that the sun which is too bright for them and for any of us to look at. But to get back to Perseus, he sets off on his journey. The gods help him. He is given wings on his shoes to make him swift. He is given a cloak of invisibility. And he is given a reflective shield so that he does not have to look at Medusa directly, but can look at her reflection in the mirror. The curved shield is an anamorphic translation of Medusa herself. Now, using these aids and with his demigod's power, he slays Medusa, he puts her head in a sack, and he starts his journey home. Perseus, who has been told of the oracle's prediction that he would kill his grandfather, decides to return to his ancestral land, the island of his grandfather, the now aged King Acrisius, to show him that he bears him no ill will. He has no desire to kill him. All has turned out well in the end. All Perseus desires is to make peace with his grandfather. Meanwhile, the news has traveled to Argos that Perseus has slain the Gorgon Medusa and that Perseus is on his way to Argos. King Acrisius, the grandfather, immediately thinks of the oracle and knows that Perseus is on his way to kill him. So King Acrisius flees his kingdom and his island, disguised as a beggar with ashes and sackcloth. Perseus is approaching the island of Argos, but decides to stop his journey at the nearby island of Larissa to take part in an athletics competition that is being held there. He has killed a Gorgon, he is half a god, he has high hopes for success in the games. And he says that if he wins the laurel wreath, he will take that and give this laurel wreath as a gift to his grandfather. He takes part in the discus competition. The stands are crowded, There's expectation in the air. He takes the stone in his left hand. He builds up momentum, rocking backwards and forwards, his body undulating as the strength grows. He transfers the discus to his right hand, and he launches it. It sails over the grassy field, past the markers of the other competitors. The discus soars over the edge of the field and into the stands. And there in the back row of the stands, it strikes and kills an old man in ashes and sackcloth. For me, this was intolerable. If only the grandfather had not sat in that seat. Why not one seat to the left or one seat to the right? Then he would have been safe. Why did Perseus have to be such a show-off? If only he'd gone straight to his grandfather's island, all would have been well. Why did the grandfather have to run away? How could so many chance events, so many unlikely elements, the discus, the disguise, the date of the athletics competition, all conspire to make the predicted inevitability? Maybe every step I took was the wrong step, or didn't take. Maybe every decision which seemed so insignificant would lead to consequences so much greater. Every decision was the wrong decision. If Perseus or his grandfather had just read the last page of the book, this could have all been avoided. But once launched, the discus could not be called back. Now, this story of Perseus is a nostos. A nostos is a poem of return. And all Perseus' adventures are, in fact, made in the course of his return to his homeland. The arc of the discus completes this nostos. A discus launched at birth, and we await its return. The most familiar nostos, of course, is Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey, the story of Ulysses, who sets out for the Trojan Wars, spends 10 years in the war, and then spends 10 years returning home to Penelope, to Ithaca, to kill the suitors who are haranguing Penelope. Some years ago, I directed an opera production of Monteverdi's opera Il ritorno di Ulisse in Patria. And one of the questions we had to solve in the production was the relationship of Ulisse to fortune, to fate. I mean, Ulisse is up against the gods, who govern the sea, the storms, who erect or remove obstacles to his return, and all the obstacles he faces on his return home. We are at the mercy of the gods. They are forces beyond ourselves. We know that all efforts, acts, creations are made in their shadow. In Ulisse, it is the gods who release thunderbolts and storms. Now, nowadays, thunderbolts are somewhat less terrifying. We can put up lightning protectors. But there are still things that exact the same terror in us. We do not anymore have to fear the external lightning stroke, but we have complete terror of the internal lightning stroke, of the lightning bolt. So although we do not make libations to the gods and burn incense in the temple the way we used to, we do this in our own ways. We forswear smoking. We give up fatty foods. We go to the temple of the gym. We try to appease that part of us which is on the one hand separate from us, but on the other hand a part of us we know that is at some point going to betray us and kill us. The lightning bolts of fate now become internal lightning bolts. A lightning strike of dye around the blood vessels of the heart. The split and separation between that part of ourselves we are conscious of and have control of, and that other self, the insides of our body. That dark inner self we take for granted, that sends messages onto us with whom we live in better or worse accord. A dark, wet unknown we hope will pump, digest, move for us. The cave we know through X-rays, other probings, knowing that what is growing inside us is not only our lives. We are caught between the internal clock of the heart and the inescapable arc of the discus. I mean, there are displacements here. First, the shift from the external constraining forces and fate to the inside of our body. The power of the gods now brought inside us to what is invisible, but which we know is both part of us and beyond our control. There's a second displacement. This internal imaging of the insides of our bodies, MRI scans, X-rays, this internal split, at its simplest, this is a split between our skin and that which is inside or underneath it, obviously refers to another gap. It refers to that gap between who we are aware of being, and all the other selves we can imagine or wish for ourselves, that we cannot reach. We're at the brink of a point of understanding. We almost understand something, but then are shut out. We're shut out by a phrase that keeps repeating over and over again in our head, which we can't get beyond. The 15-centimeter circuit of the brain. The 15-centimeter circuit of the brain. A block to us getting from where we are to some further thought. In this case, the physical dye around the heart, the MRI scan, become ways of envisaging other selves, other elements. There's the separation between the ideas we have and the ideas we sense we ought to have, that we almost have. I mean, we try to follow an idea to make a connection, but there is a limit where it comes up against our skin. We look for help from within, as if some new idea deserves to come up from us, but are left with only the sentences that finally emerge beyond us and out into the world. The idea I almost had disappears like a dream which we're trying to bring up from the depths of sleep to wakefulness, only for it to disappear as we reach the surface and we see the idea disappearing into the depths. So we take the external world and we bring it inside us. The lightning bolt from outside now becomes the internal lightning bolt to try to understand who we are, to use this physical metaphor of way of understanding other gaps and distances inside us. And then we project it out again to an image of the dye around the heart, to an image of the arc of the discus. We are at the final lecture here, and we return home here. In all the other lectures, I've used as an urtext some image or some fragment of a film from some previous work that I have done. And perhaps it is appropriate in this, the final lecture, to rather talk about work that is still in progress, work that will be completed in the next 2 months. As Peter Gallison described to you, a project I've been working on over the last 2 years, but particularly over the last year, is a project called The Refusal of Time, which is a kind of messy, boozy, overlapping series of stories and films, dances and drawings. And time is not a new subject to bring up in the lectures at this stage. And when we have been tracking time and its transformations in different ways through the 5 lectures. In the first lecture, I made reference to time turned into celestial distance. We talked about space as a universal archive of images that have left the Earth and are spreading out. And if we could just be at the right point, the right distance, we would also be at the right time from those images. If we were at Jupiter, we could see the beginning of this lecture, now going past. In the second lecture, we were concerned, amongst many other things, with the contraction that happens in operatic time, a subjective time, where a moment of thinking can be expanded into the 4 or 5 minutes of an operatic aria, where time starts to stretch and change shape in different material forms. Geological time was a theme in the third lecture, the 2 billion-year history of Johannesburg and its meteor impact, time turned into human history and into metallurgy. In the fourth lecture, we talked about time turned into the material distance of the studio. A 1.5-second sweep of the arm turned into the 35 2-centimeter divisions on a sheet of paper to be drawn and erased. Time which is then held in the paper or in a roll of film. In lecture 5, we talked about time caught in a zoetrope, an action moving forward but still kept in the same place. So time has not been a new element to bring in, and this project The Refusal of Time encompasses all of these and continues the exploration. Now, at one point I had hoped that this project, The Refusal of Time, could in fact become these 6 lectures. That did not work. Then I hoped that these lectures would become the basis for that performance piece, and that also did not work. So we end with the uneven resolution here, somewhere between a text and a drawing of a clock. And these 2 projects, the writing of the lectures, the making of the lectures, and the making of this installation and performance piece, going in tandem. The project commenced and continues, as Peter described, as an ongoing series of conversations with Peter Gallison. And then the team and the project coalesced further. Catherine Myberg, who has done all the editing of the lectures, of the video material in the lectures, was part of the central collaborator. Philip Miller, who has also written a lot of the music you've heard in different fragments of videos on it, came in as composer, a costume designer, someone to work on the sets with me. A whole series of people gathered together as if I needed an army in support of making these lectures. And at this point, I would ask, in fact, to be joined on the stage by some further collaborators, some musicians from Harvard and from Boston, who have very kindly agreed to join the ranks in making this army. Thank you. The piece, The Refusal of Time, began with various considerations of different kinds of time. But as it progressed, it became clear that it was more and more about fate and our attempts to escape from that which insists on how and where we are, and our resistance to this determination. It was more than that. It was the hope that if I started with the practical material, set designs, costumes, machinery, musical instruments, a loaded tuba, the direction and thrust of the lectures could be changed into a path I did not know or had not taken before. As if I could change not just their trajectory, but their final destination. We spent much time in these lectures in the 19th century, talking about photography, looking at time running backwards in early cinema, at attempts to codify and capture the speed of light, at attempts to put a European construction and constriction over the rest of the globe in the form of colonialism. All about attempts to wrest control of the world and to bring it to order. Now, in the mid-19th century in Paris, there was also an attempt to bring time to order. A network of pipes and tubes was constructed under the streets of Paris, with the idea of bringing hygienic time to institutions and citizens of the city. A mother clock was made with a powerful bellows, and every minute the mother clock would give a pant of air, a breath, which would travel down the thick pipes of the grand boulevards, be distributed into the thinner pipes in the smaller streets, and divided further into narrow tubes that led to the municipal offices, the train stations, and the private subscribers, who would all receive this officially approved breath of air in their daughter clocks. Every minute, the clocks would all shift 1 minute. Breathe. Wait a minute. Breathe. Wait a minute. A whole city breathing in unison, regulating themselves to a mistress clock, which stood for the idea of perfect time, of perfect order. Here we have a meeting of the clock as body and the body as clock, as if one way of comprehending the world is to take all its attributes and all its elements and map them onto our body, into who we are. As if in our very breathing we are both enacting and able to resist time. If we could know the number of breaths in our lives, the 530 million breaths or the 490 million breaths we take, and then breathe more slowly, hold our breath, in our very bodies resisting time coming towards us, knowing we will run out of breaths, knowing we will always sit in the wrong seat, knowing that the discus will hit us wherever we sit, unable to stop it hitting us, but unable to stop ourselves from changing chairs as if our life depended on it. At the very least, trying to make the journey of the discus be broken by unexpected arabesques, but still holding our breath against time. Now, time can be turned into distance, and through this, time becomes geography. The 19th century coordination of clocks was undertaken to synchronize clocks with stations in Europe. The cities in Europe would no longer construct their individual noons from when the sun was directly at its zenith. Paris and Basel would no longer have noons 7 minutes apart, but would sacrifice their own noon sun for the sake of agreement and commerce and control. And the perfection of chronometers had long been the aim of geographers, to fix more precisely the positions of islands and continents in relation to Europe. With the spread of cables under the sea and over land that followed the development of electric telegraphy, time was taken from the master clocks of Europe and sent out to the colonies. These strings of cables, these birds' nests of copper, turned the world into a giant switchboard for commerce and control. The world was covered by a huge dented bird cage of time zones, of lines of agreement of control, all sent out by the clockrooms of Europe. The lines on maps were miniature renderings of the real lines of cables that snaked round continents or drew great arcs across the floors of the oceans. The clock and the colonial observatory completed the mapping of the world. The resistance to colonial rule, the Chilembwe Revolt of 1915, the Herero Revolt of 1906, the movement and actions against Europe that spread through all the continents and all the colonies, while articulated in terms of cattle and land, were all attempts to resist the control and weight of Europe. Give us back our sun. Give us back our sun. As if the blowing up of a train line could blow up the pendulum of the European clock, which swung over every head. Let us look at what this resistance means. Entropy, as we are all familiar, talks about the degree of disorder or randomness within a system. And the resistance we are talking about also is about a universal certainty showing its cracks, the beginning of its own disorder. A resistance to the dictates arriving from the center, from Europe. And more than that, a celebration of the cracks, a celebration of the fragmentation. Entropy is a measure of the unavailability in a system of the thermal energy of that system to perform work. Let's rather describe it as a tendency for order to dissolve into disorder. It refers to the breakdown of something that starts from its site of generation as a coherent thought, a coherent object, a coherent project, a colonialism with everything intact, and gradually disintegrates, becoming fragmentary, so that when it reaches its site of reception, the distant colony, what arrives are shards and fragments. Concerning entropy, number 1. Take a vase, use a number 9 hammer and rap firmly on the rim. Smash the thing. All the pieces with their half-athletes, the discus, the tree, the maiden, all in pieces. Place the shards in a hat, shake vigorously, spread the evidence, and read your fortune. Concerning entropy, number 2. Take a vase. Use a number 9 hammer and rap firmly on the rim. Smash the thing. All the pieces with the half-athletes, the discus, the maiden, the king, the grandfather, the oracle, the fisherman, the shield, the sandals, the cloak, the shower of gold, the right chair, the wrong 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 chair, the train, the father, the son, all in pieces. Place shards in a hat, shake vigorously, spread the evidence, read your fortune. Concerning entropy, number 3. The evidence with place, take a firmly maiden, stir vigorously the shards, fragmented, and read. Athletes, a hat on the shards, all spread. Rap, rim, smash, use. Hammer your vase, fortune, a discus thing, all. Concerning entropy, number 4. Hammer on the shards. Maidens firmly all, with tap, discus, place, use, fragmented edge, all thing. Hat your fortune. Smash shards in air, the evidence a vase. Read, spread vigorously, number 9 athletes. Take a and concerning entropy, number 5. Rap maidens with your athletes you read, place on the discus, spread rim, the telegraph, the breathing lung, the beating clock, the reel of string, the directory, the atlas, the encyclopedia, the donkey, the prisoners in the cave, the drive-in cinema, the letter to the newspaper unpublished, the Bushman family preparing their meal, all translations of the panther, the rhinoceros of the right eye, the rhinoceros of the left eye, waiting for the right barrel, waiting for the left barrel, the wrong chair, 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 the horizon, the perpendicular, the acute, the arcane, the reflex, shards in a hat, and fragmented thing. Use all fortune. Smash. What is the hope? That through the course of the last 5 lectures, there are images or thoughts that have remained, even in fragmented form. And the invitation is to try to hold on to the narrative, to construct a narrative, to prevent the different elements from disappearing into a state of disorder or background radiation. In the lecture here, there is a note. This won't happen. We have to continue. But let us try to, again, trace our journey geographically. In Lecture 1, we started with the cave of Plato and the large questions. In Lecture 2, we narrowed our focus down to the Enlightenment and the colonies to Africa. In Lecture 3, we came from Africa down to Johannesburg. In Lecture 4, we came from Johannesburg into the studio. In last week's lecture, we closed in on the bookshelf of the studio and the poems of Rilke. And today we continue that investigation, narrowing our focus down to the two lines in the poem, the eye of the needle. We ended last week's lecture talking about the lines from the Panther, which are describing a movement of the Panther as a dance of strength around a center where a mighty will was put to sleep. And there is no avoiding it. We need to see how close we can get to that center. On the one hand, it is the circle around the studio, the phrases going through one's head, which get repeated again and again: typewriter, hat, tool chest, typewriter, hat, tool chest, panther, trying to stop the limited words arriving. On the one hand, hoping the walk will produce something new. On the other hand, the walk itself lulling us into this repetition of phrases. The circle is also the zoetrope. We're still circling the circle, the action that continuously returns to where it began and repeats itself. Again, pushing against expectations never realized. The hope that the image will escape the zoetrope, that it will take us to some new land and not just return us home. The zoetrope becomes a nostos on a small scale, a panther circling in the cage, the one end of the cage 4 meters away. His Troy, the feeding bowl at the other side is Ithaca, walking continuously, or Troy, Ithaca, as the panther circles the cave and the cage. To try to get closer to the center, to approach from a different angle. Why does one become an artist? And here we go to the panther and to the radical gap, to the radical insufficiency in the center. I mean, there has to be some gap, some lack, which provokes someone to spend 20 years, 30 years making drawings, having to leave tracings of themselves. I'm sure it has to do with the need to see oneself in other people's lookings at what you have made, as if you are not enough in yourself. An insufficiency in the self, a need to be a snail, leaving a trail of yourself as you move through the world. A Hansel who has to leave a trail of crumbs to lead you home. To leave a report of the studio on the walls of the studio, the gallery, the museum. As if it is only in the reflection of other people looking at these traces that one finds one's existence. I mean, and this is not healthy. I think it is one of the reasons why artists do not take criticism well. When their work is criticized, it is not simply an attribute or product of themselves that is being discussed and evaluated. It is as if they themselves, I mean, every criticism carries with it the threat of annihilation. And it's to avoid that this endless production of work around the center happens. Can we escape who we are? I think of myself as an artist making drawings, even when the charcoal is replaced by a spoken word or by an ink word, where we are led by a line, in this case by an ink line, a kind of lapidary thinking and drawing, an embroidery of words and lines, to bring us to some new image, to some new sentence, and then to take this all back. All the potential taken back. All the potential returned into the pen. The barrel of the pen refilled. The pen becoming again a loaded weapon, full of every other thought that is yet to be expressed. But understanding that as each word of the lecture is said, it cuts off all the possibility of other thoughts. Can a drawing escape where it is going? When it begins, when one is circling the studio, everything is possible. There is a new sheet of paper. All the energy is waiting in one's arm, ready to make the decision. But as it lands, as it gets ready to land, all that potential gets limited, gets coalesced, and it becomes a coffee pot. Launched again, a new sheet of paper, new possibilities. And while the shards are in the air, it's possible for anything to arrive, but what comes? Another coffee pot. There's the question of, can we be better than we are? Can we be other than we are? There's the hope for something new to arrive, that this time there will be something different, but what comes? A typewriter. Trying for something new, and what will happen? Can we stop the reduction of all potentiality? And in the end, we are reduced to making ourselves as a self-portrait as a rhinoceros, a self-portrait as a typewriter, a self-portrait as a coffee pot, a self-portrait as a megaphone. All that we wish we could be. And then there is the Torschlusspanik, the fear that with each decision that is made, with the final arrival of the image, all other images are cut out. The door to other possibilities closes behind us, and we turn in panic to the sound of that door. And what would we wish for? I mean, for the shards for once to land as a phrase in the subjunctive in French ultramarine, for a diagram of a galaxy in cobalt violet, for a griffin, for a baby sphinx in one's arms, for a clear line of sight from the history of Greek slavery to the complexities of the political situation we are in now. We'd wish for a painting of peonies by Robert Motherwell in Rose Madder Alizarin, for the design of a new escapement for a watch, for just one unqualified, unguarded declarative certainty. But even as these possible ideas emerge, they become so limited, so small, and the gap between that part of us which feels all that we should be gets larger and larger, and the only safe space is the edge, the margins of the circle. I mean, I have a pile of notebooks of lectures begun and abandoned, and the lectures themselves have taken their own direction. I mean, I would have liked to talk about different things. I made notes to give a lecture about Titian and about the two different paintings of Danae and the Shower of Gold. I found many interesting comments by Michelangelo on the condition of modern painting and of the debate between disegno and colore. There was a second lecture about the erotics of looking, going from Titian again, the glimpse of seeing and not seeing, of looking and not looking, about a surfeit of looking when a fixed gaze for too long can turn desire to ashes, or at any rate just to a contemplation of varnish, pigment and canvas. There was to be another lecture with very many interesting observations about Perseus' story of Atlas with the world on his shoulders. And then I discovered it was not the world on his shoulders, but only a map of the heavens. So that disappeared. There was a very good lecture about Gandhi and Kojève and the master-slave dialectic, about the ethics of a politics of reconciliation, a completely vital lecture, a very beautiful lecture, but it had been written by a friend of mine and not by me. These all failed. They stopped, and we've followed the path we have taken. I tried to keep away from the studio, not to talk about my work, but only other people's work. But I failed. The lectures arrived saying, "This is who you are, and this is all that you are, and you shall not escape." There's a Ghanaian proverb, or an aphorism. He that fled his fate a journey of 60 years. While he was going, it waited him, seated next to the gutter side. And it said, "Come, let us eat, my dear friend." And when he asked it, "Who is it?" it said, "Am I not thy fate?" How do we know we are in time? We listen to the pips on the radio. We watch the conductor as the downbeat of his baton is broadcast to all members of the orchestra. We stand closer to each other and we set our watches. We rely on the breath coming from the mother clock down to our daughter clock receiving the impulses to check we are synchronized. And if we move further apart from each other, we send signals and wait for a return signal and measure the difference between the two signals, the sending and receiving of signals. And after adjusting our watches for the difference, we say that we are in time. Now, once it was established that the speed of light was always invariant, what had to give up its central position was time itself. From 1905, all the coordination of 19th century clocks, the rationality of science, the meter, the kilogram, all the relationship from Newton to the French Revolution was thrown into disarray. Just as it seemed that perfect timekeeping was feasible, it was shown to be impossible. A single universal time no longer held. It was shown that as you get further away from the center of the earth, time passes more slowly. An atomic clock placed at my feet, and an atomic clock at my waist, and one at my head go at different speeds. As you get further up the body, it was found that clocks run more slowly. As bodies move faster, their clocks run more slowly. A clock at the equator runs more slowly than one at the pole. The Platonic, inviolate, universal clock and time is not operating. We each have our own clock. The Ghanaian aphorism that I read to you is retold in 1905 by Einstein. There are twins. One twin brother stands on the platform of a station, and he ages more quickly than his brother in the carriage passing through the station. Their clocks, synchronized at birth, are out of kilter. A new accommodation has to be made between them. Take a larger journey. One twin sets out for a journey in space, and one stays behind. They wave to one another. Together, their waves are coordinated, but then offset by the sending and receiving of waves. And the traveling's brother wave gets larger and slower. His hand is hardly moving. The unmoving upraised hand pushes the brother away. While to the travelling brother, his brother on the shore is more and more agitated. His waving arm oscillates faster and faster until the farewell gesture becomes a vibrating fist. The travelling twin has a journey of 20 years. But so much happens on this journey. Adventures with gorgons, with Atlas carrying the world on his shoulder, with sirens, with witches, that the 20 years he is away seem a lifetime. For the twin staying at home, the days are the same, and the years that pass disappear into the sameness. The 60, 80, 200 years he waits for his brother feel at the same time no time and an eternity. And when the messenger comes to say, we must celebrate, for he who has voyaged has returned, the one at home, now so aged, can only look up and say, who? I mean, this split of twins that we have observed at different points in these lectures, in the gap between the abilities of the self and the abilities we wished we have, between the abilities of the self and the shadow of the self, the speed, the agility, the dexterity of one's own shadow, it is of me but more than me. It is in the split between the artist as maker and the artist as viewer, and the gulf between them. And I'm aware of other twins. I'm aware of the self in Johannesburg writing these notes, projected them to myself here in Harvard. Myself here in Harvard now, thinking back and cursing the self in Johannesburg for not having got it right, for not having written better notes, leaving me high and dry. Do not complain. These notes are sufficient. It's up to you to use them well. I mean, all the possible things he could have written about, all the possible things I could have been speaking about, reduced to this. What do you need? Big statements? Answers to universal questions? The artist reveals mystic truths he could at least have written about the responsibilities of the artist, the duties of the artist, and the obligations of the artist.
The duties of the artist. I have it here, under duties of the artist. Put fresh water in the dog bowl. Number 2, work.
Work?
No, work crossed out, play.
Play.
Work crossed out, play.
Play.
Number 4,
Work.
work crossed out,
Play.
sleep. The artist is at work even when he is asleep.
I mean, such wide ambition reduced to this. I mean, there was not a word said about Clement Greenberg and his visit to Johannesburg in 1975.
I have written about what happens in the studio.
He has not written a word about art in the era of multiple biennales.
I have spoken about what happens in the studio.
He has not once mentioned Mr. Derrida, Mr. Foucault.
We did refer to G.W.F. Hegel. John Rawls and Frantz Fanon were in lecture 2 on the colonies, but after the second draft they left.
Does he really think there is no place for an intellectual in the studio?
I am not saying that. They should be invited in for coffee. But generally, while the work is being made, they are better on the bench outside the door.
He takes his chances with that answer in this space. Too smug by half.
Am I correct when I say that we have returned to where we began, using a Socratic method of question and answer?
I had not noted it, but that is so, inevitably so.
And is the Socratic method not appropriate to this university?
Let us not go down that road.
Look, there are 3 more pages of notes and dialogues that continue here. 3 more pages.
All right, enough, all right. You've had stupidity as a theme, enough.
Yeah, I give you my blessing. I write the note in Johannesburg. Stop writing at 2:10 p.m. on the 25th of February 2012. You have 5 minutes on your own to say what you like, make it up, improvise, before we get to the concluding section of these lectures. Patience. Ithaca is in sight. You may begin.
It seemed like a good idea at the time. There are still 4 minutes and 30 seconds. So this is the point at which to invoke John Cage. And just be quiet. They do talk about fire being made both by the logs. The poet writes about fire being made by the logs and the space between the logs. That a fire is made by the fuel and the absence of fuel, in the way that a lecture is made by words and the absence of words. And it strikes me that what we need now are more gaps between the words. That at this stage, after all these lectures, what I need is a Trappist vow of silence. So we can return to John Cage. But it also strikes me that what do you have in the very center of the studio, in the center of the life drawing class, but the model, being observed by everybody else in the studio, standing quietly in the center. So we have John Cage and this artist model. I mean, there's a question of what will happen when these lectures are finished and I go back to Johannesburg, back to the studio, and what will the activity be when I begin? And there's a sense, I suppose, that the first thing is to forget the lectures and get back to the work of drawing. And there are many things that I've seen that I will know will be used when I get back to the studio. There was an astonishing drawing of 6 pillows by Dürer that I saw in the Metropolitan Museum, a mixture of the softness of the pillow and the hardness of the lines of the quill pen he was using to make the drawing. And the question is whether one can continue to use this, find the softness and the hardness that would go together, and to see whether the same technique of ink drawing could be taken further as a way of finding how one could produce a similar softness, to see about the softness. And there is a question of going on with the accents, with the different accents we're talking about, to make an accent out of...
If I may interrupt, there was a section here that we meant to put in that we forgot about collisions, about particular collisions before we get to the final section on the black hole. About the artist running around the studio in one direction and the other artist, the other self, running around in the other direction. We were talking about Ulysses, and I meant to bring in Tennyson.
Alfred Lord Tennyson and Ulysses. It little profits that an idle king, wada, 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 something, 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 though much is taken, much abides. Tennyson.
We can do a collision between Alfred Lord Tennyson and Samuel Beckett.
Between Samuel Beckett and Alfred Lord Tennyson, to strive, to find.
To fail better.
And not to yield.
And not to yield. I didn't want us to forget. All right, you still have another 2 minutes. See what can be rescued.
There's a question of whether do I believe in these lectures. I think that after giving the lectures, after writing the lectures, I believed in them more. But mainly after you hearing them, I believe in them a lot more. I mean, do I believe in the broken promises of the Enlightenment that we've been speaking about a lot? And I think I do in both. Both in the promises that are made continuously and in the condition in which we live, in which they are endlessly broken. As if we are in a zoetrope of the Enlightenment, seeing things coming towards us, democracy, emancipation, freedom, and continuously tripping over them as they arrive, but still wanting the chairs with those on them to keep coming towards us. I think there's a belief in the philosophical claims of the studio. Okay. Whether whatever communications of ideas have happened here in these lectures have in fact been a reference to the place where the real making of meaning happens with me, which is in the material, in the form, whether it's a film, a piece of theater, a drawing, or the form of a lecture. As if these lectures signal towards other spaces
10 seconds.
Where other engagements and ideas can find their space, which is where they become a membrane between the outside world and the material inside the studio. Now, the twins, of course, that we've seen referred back to the stereoscope we referred to in Lecture 4, the double image left eye and right eye that we construct into a coherent illusion of stability and coherence. And this is what the artist does. Takes the fragments, the shards, and rearranges them. From the broken bicycle, handlebars, and saddle, he makes a bull. He tries to distract the inconsolable child. Here, look at this. With our hands we can make a shadow on the wall. An old woman, a bird, a horse. The meaning is always a construction, a projection, and not an edifice, something to be made and not found. There is always a radical incoherence and a radical instability. And all claims to certainty can only be held together by a text, a threat, an army, a fatwa, a sermon, that hold the fragments in an iron grip. And we return to the beginning, ready to enter the cave again. But this time, carrying the rusted bicycle frame, carrying the box of broken pottery, the bones of the last rhinoceros, ready to take our place in the procession, to throw our shadows onto the walls of the cave. We come to the dark center of the Panther's Walk. When mass is huge, gravity grows until it is irresistible. A black hole traps all that passes, allowing out of its gravitational field no object, no light, no trace of light that has been attracted to it. A black hole the size of a full stop swallows the sentence. Others swallow a house, a city, a galaxy. The journey of the projection of an image comes to an end. Perseus, Danae, the grandfather, the zoetrope, the 8-year-old on a train journey with his father, all the volumes of the library, they're all swallowed by the black hole. Is all gone, none to be retrieved. Entropy forbids all elements from entering the black chasm. As an object approaches the black hole, its wavelength lengthens, slowing down, it becomes redder and redder. The information and attributes separate from the object and remain as strings, as vibrating strings, as twists, as knots, as cat's cradles of information vibrating at the edge of the event horizon. The bank at the edge of the river Styx, where Charon deposits those headed for the black darkness of Hades. But he keeps in his boat those attributes they have shed: a suitcase of teeth, a pile of shoes, a sheaf of words, an old stone discus, held in trust, waiting to be decoded, for the shards to be rearranged, to be made new. Thank you.